This is so interesting because it's from someone who has political authority or has had it in the past. He is an activist, he is an interested party, he is an informed party, but he actually wants to believe the government case. And he's going like, hey, can we go ahead and shore up these problems here? Could we go ahead and do these tests so we can like deal with the obvious issues and leave it unresolved? Could we do that? Hello, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new to the channel, then welcome. I'd love to earn your subscription today. Well, we are in our third reading from this book. It was given to me for Christmas from Robert GRODEN, longtime JFK researcher. It's called The Government By Gunplay, and we read his chapter about the Zapruder film. Then we read through another man, Bob Katz's assessment of Lee Harvey Oswald and all of the anomalies we see in his life, which was a great look at the JFK assassination. Those two things, looking at the Zapruder film, looking at the inconsistencies present in Lee Oswald. I just want to point out actually that this was also a gift from Robert GRODEN. I've been using it as my bookmark, but it is a strip of tickets from the Texas Theater in 1963 that he shared with me. So very fun. That's what I'm using for my bookmark here. Thank you, Robert, for all the wonderful ways you've poured into my understanding of the JFK case. This chapter is Who Killed Robert Kennedy by Allard K. Lowenstein. We're going to get a little introduction into Lowenstein, so I won't say much except to say that I believe this was a friend of Robert GRODEN, and I believe he is buried now near Robert Kennedy, if I remember correctly. But let's read the introduction to his work. It says, Senator Robert F. Kennedy's entrance into the presidential contest of 1968 occurred at a propitious moment. He announced his candidacy after Eugene McCarthy surprised traditional observers by staging a strong showing against President Johnson in the New Hampshire primary. Johnson was under intense fire within his administration at the time for his conduct of the Vietnam War. Normally, within a party, there's the assumption, the presumption that the president is going to serve 2 terms. And so typically, someone from inside the party would not challenge the president in primaries for the 2nd term. And yet, Eugene McCarthy had done so and had done well. And so Robert F. Kennedy ended up throwing his hat into the ring, and we're going to read more about that. It says Johnson was under intense fire. General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, had submitted a request to him for an additional 250,000 American ground troops in the wake of the shattered Tet Offensive. Defense Secretary Clark Clifford and others in key positions of responsibility felt that the cost finally had risen too high, and they gave LBJ an ultimatum. On April 30th, the president said he would not seek another term and declared a halt to the bombing of North Vietnam. The way seemed open for peace in Vietnam and a new burst of Kennedyism. But on the night of June 5th, while celebrating his victory in the California primary, Robert Kennedy was shot dead. The solution to the RFK assassination appeared obvious. Sirhan Sirhan, after all, was captured alive on the scene by eyewitnesses. However, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the Los Angeles County coroner, testified in 1968, the same year of the assassination, that the fatal bullet was fired from behind Kennedy and that the gun muzzle was only 2 to 3 inches from his head. Noguchi's statement was the first calling attention to many discrepancies and unanswered questions in the case. On October 6, 1975, a panel of ballistics experts assembled by LA Superior Court Judge Robert F. Wenke reported their findings on a test firing of Sirhan's gun. So I want to remind you, this book is published in 1976. So he's talking about something that happened the year before, and it's all regarding a case that at the time of printing was 8 years old. The press immediately stated that the panel had concluded that there was no demonstrable evidence proving the use of more than one gun in the assassination. The conspiracy theorists seemed to be proven wrong. But the media accounts were based only on the first line of the report. Dr. Robert J. Joling, president of the prestigious American Academy of Forensic Science, claimed that, quote, the press jumped the gun, end quote. What the report said was that while there was no evidence of a second gun, there was also no evidence that the bullets could be traced to Sirhan's gun. Panelists, therefore, called for further tests. Undoubtedly, some of their recommendations will be acted upon, and the inquiry will continue to expand. Allard K. Lowenstein, initiator of the Dump Johnson movement and a former New York congressman, is now consultant to California Governor Edmund Brown Jr. His article, an edited version of two pieces written in the spring and summer of 1975, deals with the RFK case up to the issuance of the ballistic experts report. Okay, so we're going to get a summary of the case through 1975. So the first, say, 7 years of the investigation is what we're about to read. The Warren Commission was appointed to resolve the doubts of the American people about who killed President Kennedy. Simply to state its goal is to announce its failure. Whatever high purpose the commission sought to serve at the time, it is now clear that the report omitted too much and misstated too much to stand the test of a new time. Assassinations of presidents and other national figures are not ordinary murders. When bullets distort or nullify the national will, democracy itself has been assaulted. An event of such consequence cannot then be put to rest until the public is satisfied that it understands what happened. This will not be achieved by zealous upholders and detractors of official assassination theories thrashing at each other while crucial questions hang in limbo. Many ascertainable facts about the murders of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King and the attempt on George Wallace are still in dispute. Incompetent new investigations would seem in everyone's interest. But the lone assassin theorists oppose any re-examination, as if accepting the need for one prejudged its outcome. I was once typical of many people who refused to face questions that threatened some cherished assumptions about America. We had closed our minds and didn't even know we had done it. Then came the discovery that things had happened in our country that few of us believed could happen. The enemies list was my personal tripwire. I was confused about the implications of official tampering with my affairs, but one thing was certain. Tales of tapped wires and planted provocateurs could no longer be dismissed simply as signs of hysteria. If the White House, the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, and other prime instruments of an impartial government could be used against civil rights groups, churches, members of Congress, and anyone else who incurred official displeasure, clearly someone somewhere might have organized some of the events that had changed America. Wow. Just that is a big statement coming from a congressman. As an aside, what we should know about Allard K. Lowenstein is he was an American liberal democratic politician who served New York as a congressman. He was a social and civil rights activist, and he himself was assassinated, I believe in 1980 or 1981. So just 4 years after this was published, he was assassinated. It's insightful that someone with that much power was willing to go on the record in this way and say, it's troubling that these powerful institutions are being used against people who have incurred official displeasure. And that if that's the case, then someone somewhere might have organized some of these massive social change events. And he's implying the assassinations. So let's listen. We actually get some first-person investigation language here. The implications of that possibility were staggering and drove me to take a belated look at the assassinations. But murder is a long way from improper surveillance. And when I started to look, I doubted that there was much to find. I chose the Robert Kennedy case partly because it hardly seemed open to question at all, and I was sure that meetings with early skeptics would end my involvement. Then, for the first time, I saw the autopsy report. The medical evidence is that Senator Kennedy was killed by a bullet that entered his head from a distance of 1 inch to 1.5 inches. He was hit by a total of 3 bullets, all from behind, and all at a distance of 1 to 3 inches. But everyone knew that Sirhan had been in front of Senator Kennedy, firing from a distance of several feet. I read the eyewitness testimony, talked to people who had been near the shooting, and soon realized that no credible evidence placed the muzzle of Sirhan's gun closer than 1.5 feet from Senator Kennedy. The consensus of eyewitness testimony places Sirhan's gun 2 to 3 feet in front of Kennedy. Pete Hamill, the writer, Frank Burns, an LA attorney, and others who saw the shooting at close range are unequivocal on this point, that Sirhan's gun was never close to the place from which the bullets were fired that inflicted the wounds described in the autopsy. But eyewitness testimony is unreliable, and I was sure that other information would clear up these contradictions. Then, I met William W. Harper, a giant in the science of firearms. He told me that bullets recovered from Kennedy's neck and from bystander William Weasel's stomach did not appear to have been fired from the same gun. Furthermore, he said that neither of these bullets seemed to match bullets purportedly test-fired from Sirhan's gun. 2 guns were being fired concurrently in the kitchen pantry of the Ambassador Hotel at the time of the shooting. It is extremely unlikely that any of the bullets fired by the Sirhan gun ever struck the body of Kennedy. I want to remind you, Sirhan is still to this day behind bars. What we're reading is an absolute coup. It's the government tamping down political thought. Highly troubling. A panel of experts analyzed the ballistic evidence at the convention of the American Academy of Forensic Scientists in Chicago in February. The experts agreed that this evidence required a reopening of the investigation and that reliable scientific measures could be taken that would help clear up at least some of the confusion. One member of the panel, Professor Herbert McDonnell, a world-renowned authority in forensic pathology, stated flatly, "The bullet removed from Kennedy's neck could not have come from Sirhan's revolver." That's very flat and plain, isn't it? Meanwhile, access to the evidence was barred by officials so that McDonnell and others were not permitted to examine the bullets except through photographs. So you can't even look at them and tell what's going on. Other problems are presented by testimony about this evidence taken at Sirhan's trial. Bullets from a gun test fired by the LAPD criminalist Dwayne Wolfer were entered into evidence at Sirhan's trial as Exhibit 55. Wolfer testified that these bullets matched the bullet that was recovered from Kennedy's neck, and that therefore the bullets that hit Kennedy could only have been fired by the gun he had test fired. The serial number of that gun, inscribed in Wolfer's handwriting on Exhibit 55, is H18602. The serial number of Sirhan's gun is H53725. Wolfer says this discrepancy is the result of a clerical error. Requests to test fire or refire H18602 brought the information that the gun had been destroyed by the LAPD. The gun that had matched the bullets that he had said was Sirhan's gun, that later was said not to be Sirhan's gun. That gun was destroyed by the LAPD. Requests to test fire or refire H53725, the one that is actually Sirhan's gun, have been refused. Thus, at this time, it is impossible to discover whether Sirhan's gun, H53725, has ever been test-fired. But the sworn testimony of Wolfer is that the bullets that killed Kennedy were fired by a different gun, H18602, and no other gun in the world. So a ballistics expert said that the bullets that hit Kennedy matched the gun that was later destroyed by the LAPD, but not Sirhan's gun. Perhaps even more unsettling was a problem that arose about the number of bullets and bullet holes that turned up in the ambassador pantry. Sirhan's gun could and did fire 8 bullets. 1 bullet was recovered from each of the 5 bystanders who were shot in the pantry, so each of them has 1. 2 bullets were recovered from Kennedy, 1 shattered from his head, that was the fatal bullet, and the other discussed above from his neck. Thus, 7 of the 8 bullets that Sirhan could have fired have been recovered. An 8th bullet is officially described as, quote, lost in the ceiling interspace. Another bullet exited Kennedy's chest, and still another passed through the right shoulder pad of his jacket. The LAPD removed 3 panels from the sound paneling below the ceiling and booked them as evidence because they contained bullet holes. The official explanations of how 8 bullets caused all this damage are varied and confusing. But no matter how many theories are advanced, one fact is inescapable. If only 8 bullets were fired, 1 bullet had to enter one of the ceiling panels, bounce off of the floor above, exit through another ceiling panel, and end finally in one of the bystanders. The official position is that the bullet removed from the head of a bystander, Mrs. Elizabeth Evans, did this. Mrs. Evans had lost her shoe and was stooped over to retrieve it when she was hit in the forehead by a bullet from the ceiling that progressed into her scalp. This bullet weighed 39 grains when fired. 30.7 grains were removed from Mrs. Evans' head, and an additional fragment is still in her scalp. It should be added that at the time of the assassination, at least 1 more bullet was reliably reported to have been found in the pantry. An AP wire photo taken on June 5, 1968 shows 2 policemen examining what the AP caption describes as a bullet found near Kennedy's shooting scene. It is located in a door frame. The LAPD and the Office of the DA now say that this report was inaccurate. This sounds very like the bullet marks in Dealey Plaza, doesn't it? No reasonable person confronted with all of those odd discoveries could say flatly that Sirhan had been the only person shooting at Robert Kennedy. That, however, is what I wanted to believe. My mind, like an errant eye, would wander off to the comfortable fantasy that nothing else could have been going on, and I would have to pull it back consciously to grope with unexplained facts. I decided to take a list of questions and suggestions for tests to the Los Angeles District Attorney, as one might confer with an experienced friend. The questions were finite, answerable, and central to the case. The tests were inexpensive, widely used in homicides, and essential if apparent discrepancies were to be resolved. So this is so interesting because it's from someone who has political authority or has had it in the past. He is an activist, he is an interested party, he is an informed party, but he actually wants to believe the government case. And he's going like, hey, can we go ahead and shore up these problems here? Could we go ahead and do these tests so we can deal with the obvious issues and leave it unresolved? Could we do that? Perhaps my simplest and most important request was that Sirhan's gun be test fired to deal directly with the problems of matching the bullets. I also asked that the impartial experts be permitted to study the ceiling panels and the door frame. If the 3 bullet holes in the panels were entry holes, at least 10 bullets had been fired. If the bullet reported in the door frame were confirmed, at least 9. If either of these things were true, Sirhan's gun could not have done everything by itself. Nobody suggested the panels or the door frame no longer existed, or that they couldn't provide valuable information. I expected satisfactory explanations, and I was so sure the authorities would want to check anything they couldn't explain that it never occurred to me it would be necessary to raise these issues publicly. and I was reluctant to get into a public discussion that I knew would cause more pain for the Kennedy family, which God knows had suffered enough. But the official response has remained as peculiar as the problems presented by the evidence. Everyone was polite and talked about cooperation, but nobody did anything with the list except periodically to request more copies. The case was in disarray, and all I could get from those responsible for it were delays, evasions, and misstatements. Still, it took another year of fruitless private discussions to convince me that the authorities would do nothing voluntarily. Hear, hear. We've seen it in all of the document releases, haven't we? Or the lack of document releases, the obfuscations, the shredding, the delay tactics. He's experiencing it firsthand. This is why Paul Schrade and I finally spoke out. Schrade is a former United Auto Workers official who almost lost his life with Kennedy on June 5th, 1968. He is a man of rare good sense and integrity. We thought the public would be troubled when it learned the facts, and that this would encourage official action. It turned out to be impossible to arouse public concern because the major media generally declined to report accurately, if at all, what we said. This is Project Mockingbird at work. We see it right now today as I'm filming with the way the Epstein report was just released. Shocking level of details, horrifying level of emails, of photo evidence, things with very concerning implications if true. Not a peep from the mainstream media about it. They don't want to talk about it. They're not interested. We're talking about a transnational group of intelligence operatives that are controlling and influencing and manipulating the powerful people and the rich people and the people with status among nations. We're not interested in that. We have an email even saying from Jeffrey Epstein, "You know I represent the Rothschilds." Not interested. Well, here, in 1974, 52 years ago, they were also not interested. Same government program, tamping down undesirable stories. We held press conferences on December 15th and 19th, 1974. These were ignored entirely in the news columns of the Los Angeles Times, the only widely read newspaper in the city where the murder occurred. The Times did, however, run an editorial that misrepresented our unreported statement and ascribed such suspicions principally to an unwillingness to conclude that mundane facts can explain such fearful dramas. You could almost take those words exactly from the lips of Ruth Paine, couldn't you? She says, "Oh, people have a hard time believing that such a small man could commit such a great crime. That such a small person could be responsible for taking out such a massive and influential man." It's the same party line of such an unwillingness to conclude that mundane facts can explain such fearful dramas. Like, what a bunch of hooey. Makes me angry to read it. It dismissed the whole matter as wispy and long since discounted by the authorities. Yeah, we've already dealt with that. That's a common tactic as well. They are raising new facts, new concerns, real questions by someone who has attempted for an entire year to get his questions answered. We already dealt with that. This is just people who can't accept that something unexplainable, something trivial was able to take out someone so powerful. This was one of a series of such editorials in the Times, none of which have dealt with the evidence, and most of which have managed to question the motives of those seeking to deal with the evidence. CBS Evening News ended its report with a statement that precisely reversed the facts, that every eyewitness had seen Sirhan shooting Robert Kennedy. The Washington Post saw nothing newsworthy about the press conferences, but ran instead a rather excited front-page story claiming that Harper had repudiated his findings. The nationally recognized ballistics expert, the story began, whose claim gave rise to a theory that Robert F. Kennedy was not killed by Sirhan Bashira Sirhan, this week admitted that there is no evidence to support his contention. A statement so imaginative that not even the article that followed could support it. Harper was appalled and issued new affidavits in support of reopening the case. So the man that they are quoting, the nationally recognized ballistics expert who supposedly turned his back on it, is issuing new affidavits saying, no, I'm in favor of new test fires. Meanwhile, the local authorities have tried to reinforce their version of events by continually repeating two statements they know are false. Quote, no one saw any other weapon, as Joseph Bush, then the Los Angeles DA, has put it to Stern magazine. In fact, Bush knows there was at least one other gun in the pantry, that it was drawn, and that it was located in the area from which the bullets that hit Kennedy were fired. Richard Lubick, an independent television producer, is amongst those who saw that gun. Quote, I saw a man in a guard's uniform standing a couple of feet to my left behind Kennedy. He had a gun in his hand and was pointing it downward. You guys, I have not looked deeply into this assassination. I think we've read one overview article and then one looking at Sirhan in jail. This quote is so reminiscent of the grassy knoll eyewitnesses who are so sure of what they saw, and yet they're just ignored or dismissed. The man that Lubick saw, quote, in a guard's uniform, was a part-time security guard who had been hired by the Ace Guard Service of Van Nuys, California. The guard had subsequently acknowledged that he was standing just behind Kennedy and that he was carrying a gun and that he drew it, quote, to protect Kennedy. He denies having fired this gun. So we're going to continue reading, but the point being that there was no other gun in the pantry is itself not true. Even if you think, well, this guy didn't fire, maybe it's proven he didn't fire. Maybe there's video footage. We don't know. I'm not saying at this point that that's true or not true. My point is the statement that there was no other gun in the vicinity is itself untrue, right? On NBC's Tomorrow Show, Joseph Bush said, every eyewitness that you talk to, there is nobody that disputes that he, Sirhan, put that gun up to the senator's ear and he fired in there, end quote. So this is Joseph Bush, the Los Angeles DA, testifying that there's no witness that said anything else other than that Sirhan put the gun to the ear and fired in there. When I asked him to name one such witness, he replied, would you like Mr. Uker, the man that grabbed his arm? Would you like any of the 55 witnesses? John Howard, now acting DA, is more restrained in his misstatements. He says there are 20 to 25 eyewitnesses who saw the same thing. He, too, when pressed to name one, names Uker. The name is Uecker. I'm saying Uker. Let me know. I'm sure you will if I'm mispronouncing it. I have talked to Carl Uker twice. Both times he was as explicit as were his statements to the grand jury and at the trial. Sirhan's gun was directly in front of his nose, Uker's nose, and the shortest possible distance between his gun and Senator Kennedy's head was 1.5 feet. 1.5 feet. That's the closest possible distance. He's saying he was in front of my nose, 1.5 feet. Closest possible. In view of Bush's description of Uker as our man, it may be useful to quote Uker's statement in full. Here we have it. I have told the police and testified during the trial that there was a distance of at least 1.5 feet between the muzzle of Sirhan's gun and Kennedy's head. The revolver was directly in front of my nose. After Sirhan's second shot, I pushed his hand that held the revolver down and pushed him onto the steam table. There is no way that the shots described in the autopsy could have come from Sirhan's gun. When I told this to the authorities, they told me that I was wrong. But I repeat now what I told them then. Sirhan never got close enough for a point-blank shot. Never. It is worth noting that Uker has raised still another problem. At least 4 bullets hit Kennedy or his clothing. If Sirhan was pushed onto the steam table after firing 2 shots, it is difficult to see how he could have fired the 4 shots that hit Kennedy. The 6 other bullets Sirhan fired would have had to hit other targets, since he could hardly have shot Kennedy from behind at point-blank range while he was struggling on the steam table. The simple fact, moreover, is that no eyewitness has ever placed Sirhan's gun at Senator Kennedy's head. It provokes distrust when high officials who know this perfectly well continue to say the opposite. Yet media coverage of official distortions has been no greater than coverage of the initial problems that were distorted. So media coverage of the distortions is not any greater than coverage up of the initial problems that were distorted, which takes us full circle. How can we get a fresh, independent investigation if the facts that demand such an investigation are stonewalled into non-existence? So if they just stonewall us and they refuse to hear about the evidence, this is exactly the same tactic as what was happening with the Zapruder film at the time. They were not ever going to release it. It was in the vaults. Mr. GRODEN released it. Suddenly, a whole whirlwind of activity investigating the president's assassination began. But this is a similar thing where he's asking, he's presenting, he's being respectful, he's giving them time. No answers. So he brings it public. The media is like, oh, there's no story here. All this has already been answered. So how can an investigation happen in that environment is what he's asking. The reason most frequently given for the absence of coverage is a variation on the official excuse for inaction. Facts about this case, however significant, are not new. Sometimes this seems to mean that if a newsboy's insomniac grandmother once heard something on a late-night talk show in Dubuque, the rest of the public can't find out about it unless they happen to know her. But even this reasoning cannot explain why developments that merit front-page treatment in Europe go virtually unreported in the United States. It's the phenomenon we've talked about, that facts could be more easily talked about in other nations than here. Few Americans have heard, for example, about the conclusion of the panel of ballistics experts cited above, or know about the plea of 4 of the bystanders who were shot, or have seen the statements of the witnesses closest to the scene of the murder. This year, several Stern magazine reporters conducted an extended investigation. Stern is a leading West German news weekly. Their findings were detailed in a cover story entitled, "The Real Murderer of Robert Kennedy is Still Free." Those findings were not reported in the United States. If the stonewalling succeeds, we will be compounding the tragedy of Robert Kennedy's murder. For what commands the reopening of this case is not curiosity, nor devotion to abstract concepts of justice, nor sentimentalism about Kennedy. What commands the reopening of this case is the grisly question of whether disasters may loom ahead that could be averted if we found out more about disasters already past. Yeah, you guys, he's talking about Epstein. He's talking about future catastrophes that could be averted if we got liars out of power, if we got those who were able to cover it up, that our own former president warned about 1 month after the assassination, when Truman wrote the report calling out the CIA on December 22nd, 1963. Allard Lowenstein is saying the same thing. We've got to deal with this. If we don't deal with it, they will continue to bring about injustice in the future. That's the call he's making right here. And oh my goodness, on this day post the reveal of the Epstein situation, I feel this same level of concern. If we don't deal with it, if we don't root it out, they continue to hold power. They continue to do whatever they want without any punishment at all. An independent investigation committed to seeking out all the facts wherever they may lead is clearly the best way to proceed at this point. Still true. In 2026, it's still true. Whatever we discover about the murder of Senator Kennedy, we must find an acceptable way to re-examine all the major assassinations. As in Los Angeles, central and answerable questions must be delineated and investigated independently. Congress should adopt Representative Henry Gonzalez resolution to create a special committee to do this. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was, I think, part of this call. I do not know if there was a conspiracy to murder President Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, Martin Luther King, or Governor Wallace. I do know it is possible that there was a conspiracy to murder one or more of them. If there were such conspiracies, I do not know if there were connections between them. I do know it is possible there were connections of some kind between some of them. I do not know if we can ever find out the full story, if indeed there is a full story not yet found out. I do know we had better free ourselves of preconceptions so we can do our best to find out. Those of us who have preached that the electoral process is the way to decide policies and leadership ought to feel a special obligation to help this effort. We are about to go through another campaign to choose a president. The last 3 presidential elections were distorted by bullets. If somewhere there are groups and organizations that have aborted the electoral process for political purposes and that could do so again, the rest of us may be characters in a charade. To face the possibility is not to assume it is a fact. Not to face it is to take an unacceptable risk with the future of the Republic. Allard K. Lowenstein. Wow. What a man. What a call to action. I feel personally chastened that I feel the same way that he took this seriously, we should be taking it seriously. And, you know, sometimes the assassination becomes just part of the wallpaper of my life. People send me books. Just yesterday, I'll share with you guys. Our same friend of the channel, Corey, dropped this by for me. The Washington Post from Sunday, November 24th, 1963. It doesn't yet say anything about Oswald's, his own assassination by Jack Ruby. So this would have been printed before that. So, you know, the assassination and its details are now part of the wallpaper of my life, and that can make a little bit of a numbing to it. I'm so grateful for writings like this that draw me back to the significance of it, the importance of knowing the truth. The fact that he himself was assassinated, that is something that I'm going to have to read more about and learn more about. But I greatly appreciated this article about the assassination of RFK. I do feel that it made some of the plain facts very clear. Next time, come back. We're going to be reading an article by Jeff Cohen, The Assassination of Martin Luther King. Also very, very serious. After that, we have the shooting of George Wallace, and then an article about Cointelpro and the Black Panthers. So lots coming up that's going to move us around into lots of different topics. I hope you're excited about this book. I really am. I hope you were challenged and moved. I feel struck by the emotional weight and the political significance of his last charge. But if other details stand out to you, please share them in the comments. I'll look forward to hearing that. I hope you have a great day. Bye.